Ghost of Christmas Future Perfect by Rhys Timson. There were few worse phrases in the English language than office Christmas party, at least as far as Henry Pound was concerned. And for 10 years now he had merrily skipped the festive shindigs at Packaging Monthly magazine, where, as chief sub-editor, he had maintained grammatical and orthographical standards for 15 long years. Few people understood just how important proper grammar was to society. But Henry knew. It was a slippery slope from ending sentences with prepositions to bashing rocks together in caves and shitting in gullies. While his colleagues got drunk on the company card, he would spend his time doing something of importance, writing his personal guide to correct English usage. He would call it Pound's Perfect Prose. "Watch out, Lynn Truss," he thought. "I'm coming for you." He looked up from his labours and out of the window by his desk. There had been a fluttering of snow earlier that had caused the usual childish excitement in the office, but it hadn't settled and had turned into a muddy drizzle that blurred the view beyond the glass. His colleagues had filed out at 3 to the pub across the road. He had waved them off with promises that he would join them as soon as he finished some really important work. Everyone knew that was a lie, of course. The December issue had gone to press. There was no more work to do for the year. His colleagues asked him to follow them only out of politeness, and he responded in kind, more or less. Truth was, he'd rather step in front of a Northern Line train than suffer 3 hours of small talk with Jill from accounts or Jack from sales. The names and faces had changed over the years. The conversations never had. He went into the kitchen to make another drink, dropping a tea bag into a tannin-stained mug that bore the slogan, "Apostrophe Protection Society." He would give it an hour or so and then slip out the back door so as not to have to walk past the pub. There was always the possibility one of them would be out there vaping. Sitting at his desk again, he took a sip of tea and scowled. Milk was off. He must have picked the wrong carton. God knows how long the one he had used had been in there. He closed his eyes, feeling queasy. When he opened them again, he was not alone. Standing in the middle of the desk opposite, not beside the desk or on top of it, but in the middle of it, was a man he had not seen in 15 years. And that was because the man in question, Clive Gander, his predecessor as chief sub-editor, had died 15 years ago after suffering a heart attack so massive it should have been visible from space. Henry suppressed a scream and closed his eyes again. He held them shut for a good few seconds in hope the apparition would go away. But no. Clive was still there, in the tattersall shirt he'd died in, albeit now see-through and fringed with a green glow. His head was being dragged down by a chain made of hardback books. Among them, Fowler's Modern English Usage and Strunk and White's Elements of Style. Even a rare copy of Robert Louth's short introduction to English grammar. Henry thought. First edition. "Henry," cried the spectre, "you must change your ways, or be cursed to walk the earth like me, balancing the weight of all your years of pedantry on your back, you will be visited tonight by 3 ghosts. 3 more ghosts, Henry said. Presumably you count as the first. The spirit of the old chief sub wailed and writhed under the weight of the assembled English usage guides, and then came charging at Henry with an unearthly roar that sent him tumbling backwards onto the grimy carpet tiles. Always so dramatic, Henry said, picking himself up and rubbing his head. He peered out of the window again. It looked warm and bright in the pub. He could see movement beyond the misted-up windows that suggested dancing. He hated dancing. But the thought of retiring to his one-bed flat in Clapton after this sudden hallucination was not appealing either. He sat down again and tried to steady his trembling hands. A moment later, the door flung open and a cold wind blew in. Standing on the threshold was a pale monk in a black cassock, levitating several inches off the floor. The phantom friar opened his mouth, and Henry cut him off. "There's no need. I know who you are." The monk had the red-stained hands of a rubricator, and as he wrapped his cold fingers around Henry's slightly less cold ones, the scene before him shifted and changed. He was still in the office, but it was suddenly alive with people he hadn't seen in years. John, the old news editor. Glenn, his first editor-in-chief. Sam, the reporter with literary ambitions, who had once tried to use the word Panglossian in an article about cardboard recycling. All these old faces told Henry that he was looking deep into Yuletide past. "Your first year with the company," the ghost said, folding its crimson hands into the sleeves of its robes. Everyone was standing near the little Christmas tree in the corner, exchanging secret Santa gifts. Everyone except poor old Clive, at this point only a few weeks away from his fatal coronary, who always refused to take part in the festivities. Henry saw a young man standing in the middle of the crowd that seemed eerily familiar. "Young and full of hope," the monk said. "And with more hair," Henry said, eyeing his younger self enviously. The monk ran his hand over his tonsure and declined to comment. Standing next to past Henry was a woman about the same age, in a Fair Isle jumper, with brown hair tied back in a ponytail. She was watching intently as he unwrapped his gift. "Do you remember the lady?" the monk said. Henry shrugged. "I think her name was Claire." Past Henry ripped off the paper to reveal a mug. "Apostrophe Protection Society," read the slogan on the side of the pristine white porcelain. "Thank you, Secret Santa," Past Henry said, holding up the vessel for his colleagues to see. Claire whispered something in Past Henry's ear, and present Henry cringed as he watched his younger self subtly link his hand into that of his colleague. "You did not exchange vows with the lady?" the monk said. "She typed 2 spaces after a full stop." "It would never have worked." He had to look away as Claire and Past Henry kissed under some mistletoe, and his eyes settled instead on the doomed Clive, clandestinely picking his nose and playing window solitaire. He wanted to reach out, to tell his younger self that ignorance of typographical conventions was no reason to end a promising relationship, even if The person in question persisted in their heresy, despite being educated on the matter. Maybe there were more important things? But when he turned back to the Christmas scene, it had disappeared entirely, and he was once again in the present day, standing in a dark corner of the office with the old, tea-stained mug in his hands. "I see," he whispered. He was aware of a presence, and of course he knew what was coming next. Hovering behind him was a ghost in a blue shirt and a flat cap, a man from a printworks whose hands and forearms were stained black with ink. Henry put his mug down on the nearest desk, and suddenly he was several metres away, standing in the middle of the scrum of drinkers in the pub across the road. He apologised profusely as a large man balancing 3 pints in his hands turned towards him and made to get past, but the man simply walked through him without a word. His colleagues were directly in front of him, and they were laughing about something. About someone. "What was his excuse this year?" said Chris from sales. "Same as last," replied Ron, the chief editor. "Essential housekeeping." "What do you think he does at Christmas?" This was Laura, one of the new, young reporters he'd yet to fully alienate. "Spend some quality time in the dictionary, I'd imagine," Chris said, and the group laughed. The pub was warm and bright, with holly tacked to the rafters and tinsel liberally wrapped round the bar. The drinks were flowing. Some people were singing. "He still hasn't forgiven me for pulling rank over the Oxford comma 5 years ago," said Ron. "I think he's lonely," said Laura. "I think he's a twat," said Chris, and the group laughed again and clinked glasses. The warmth and light of the pub disappeared, dissolving before Henry's eyes, leaving him standing alone once more in the dark of the office. And it was entirely dark now. All the strip lights and monitor screens were off. Henry was shivering, his polyester jumper no longer enough to keep out the chill. He was looking for the light switches when the room was suddenly bathed in a blue glow. The temperature plummeted even further, so that Henry's bones were rattling as he turned to see a towering figure in a black robe, its hood pulled back to reveal a smooth metal surface, set with a screen that showed a laughing face emoji. The final spectre lifted its robotic fingers and pointed at Henry. And then the office vanished for the final time. He was standing in a small, ornamental garden in the courtyard of a utilitarian-looking building. The ghostly robot was beside him and still pointing, this time away from Henry, and towards a wall upon which were set rows and rows of square bronze plaques. Of course, he had an idea of what he would see before he saw it. He knew what was coming, how this story would end. But still, nothing could really have prepared him for it. The coldness, the shock, the feeling of walking on his own grave as he saw the chiselled words that read, "Here lies Henry Pound, who loved grammar more than he loved life. Rest now at journey's end." "Oh God!" he cried. "How could this happen?" And he fell down on his knees before the wall of remembrance, fingers clutching at what remained of his hair. "The choices you made led you here," the apparition said dolefully. "Is this how I am to be remembered?" Henry moaned, and he turned to the ghost and clawed at its midnight black robe. "Tell me this isn't true! Tell me this isn't how it ends!" "Do you see now your error?" the apparition said. Henry let go of the robe and recovered himself. "My error?" he snarled. "My error? What do you mean, my error?" you blind? The ghost robot having no eyes, Henry was genuinely unclear about that last point. The picture on the screen changed from the crying face emoji to the thinking face emoji, which the spectral automaton duly pointed in the direction of the plaque. Journey's end? Henry said bitterly. Journeys! Not 2 or more journeys. The end of a journey. They've left out the apostrophe. I haven't spent my life fighting the hordes of linguistic vandals to end like this, he yelled at the ghost. Take me back, and I'll go to my grave making sure no one mistakes a possessive for a plural ever again. There was no emoji in existence to express the ghost's reaction to this outburst. Henry merely found himself dropped back in the office in the present day. Filled with a renewed sense of pedantic purpose, he turned the main lights back on, cracked his knuckles, and got back to work on his book.